Today's Good Friday. There's no better day to reflect deeply on the death of Jesus than today. Now on Sunday, we'll be reading the resurrection story from the Gospel of John. And one thing that I've come to learn is that the story we hold in our head about the death and resurrection of Jesus, really all of Jesus, the birth and life too, is really a conglomeration of the four Gospels. When you put the stories and you pull them apart, you put them in their own lane, we realize each gospel story tells everything a bit differently. For instance, what did Jesus say on the cross? Well, it depends on who you ask. Matthew and Mark both have Jesus quoting Psalm 22, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" This is known as the cry of dereliction. Jesus would never have said such words in the Gospel of John. And the theology in John's Gospel is a very Trinitarian-centric one. John 1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God." We believe the Word is referring to the Christ. In John 10:30, Jesus says, "I and the Father are one." In John 14, Jesus says, "I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may also be." John's Jesus is highly Christological. John's Christ figure is God in human form. So in John, it's God who is on the cross, and that God would never complain that he'd been forsaken. He was there for a reason. When you pull the Gospels apart and you read them in their own lane, a lot happens that's super cool. So I want to explore John's Good Friday scene with you in more detail today. If you want to read along, it's found in John 19 through 27. Good Friday opens with a continuation of Maundy Thursday evening. Jesus is arrested on bogus charges of blasphemy. Think about that. He said he was God and God's son, or God sent him into the world. Each gospel says it a bit differently. Jesus was also a troublemaker. He ransacked the temple, causing huge disruption of commerce and trade. He broke the Mosaic law by healing on the Sabbath. Never mind the fact that he had the ability to heal people in general, but he chose to do it on the day of rest. For some, that's unconscionable. Jesus threatened to destroy the very fabric of the society by saying he would tear down the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Jesus preached numerous times that a new kingdom was coming to this earth, and we needed to be prepared that this new kingdom would conquer the earth in which we live, and Jesus would be Lord of it. He even said he was the resurrection and the life. Nobody comes to God except through him. I mean, these are fighting words to religious people trying to maintain law and order. Jesus was too much, too fast. So he gets arrested, goes before Pilate. That whole scene is worth exploring in another time, but ultimately Jesus is arrested, flogged, which is another angle worth pursuing, and sentenced to a criminal's death of crucifixion. Now, it's important to note, there's nothing holy or salvific about the act of crucifixion. Everyone in Jesus' day was crucified. It was the most efficient form of capital punishment, and it was meant to be a deterrent for anyone thinking that they too might want to break the law. You were hung on a tree until you died, and then you were left there for people to fear. So this scene is now set. This is Good Friday. Let's dig into the Gospel of John's version. When you stay just in John's lane, you notice some very familiar parts of the story are missing. For instance, Jesus was mocked by the guards, right? Not in John. Jesus was hung by another we call the penitent thief, right? Not in John. A dark storm cloud appeared in midday, making it feel like night, right? Not in John. We know the times of Jesus' death because the gospel tells us at 9 a.m. in the morning, right? Not in John. There's no mentioning of time. There's no veil torn in John. There's no cry of dereliction. There's no earthquake. There's no confession from a centurion in the Gospel of John. Now, the centurion, that character is not even in the narrative. Now, wherein in Mark, The centurion is the one character who declares, surely this man was the Son of God. It was a Roman officer who looked upon the death of Jesus and believed that he was the Christ. John doesn't even have that character in the story. Why not? Well, like any author, John is focusing on other things. You'd think with the way that I'm describing all of this, that the Gospel of John would have nothing to say about Good Friday or why this day is important. But you would be wrong. There are three things. Well, there are actually more than three, but there are three things that I want us to focus on today. I want to point these out so that you can see just how important John's Gospel is on Good Friday. If it weren't for John's Gospel, we would be missing some of the most theological points of this day. The three things are the inscription over Jesus' head, the seamless tunic, and the scene with Jesus' mother and the beloved disciple. All three of these are found in John 19 through 27. Let's start with the inscription, verses 19 through 22. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priest of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." I love that last line from Pilate. The other Gospels make you think that the sign is meant only to be read in jest, mocking Jesus by putting a sign above the cross that says, King of the Jews. But John takes this moment and builds on it, goes a step further. Actually, in the musical Jesus Christ Superstar, there's a fantastic rendition of Jesus going before Pilate. And in the song, there's a refrain of the crowds mocking Jesus, but Pilate really honestly questioning whether or not Jesus is King of the Jews. John's gospel is the same. So why do we see this difference? Why does John include an entire paragraph showing that the sign means more than just mockery? Because John is all about double and triple meanings. This is why we say John is more Christological. He's more theological in how he writes these stories. He also adds a significant detail that Matthew, Mark, and Luke leave out. Verse 20, many of the Jews read the sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. All three major languages. Why? We'll come back to that. The second scene here is the seamless tunic, or garment. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them with the undergarments remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. "Let's not tear it," they said to one another. "Let's decide by lot who will get it." This happened that scripture might be fulfilled that said, "They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment." So this is what the soldiers did. Now, similar to the inscription, John's gospel takes a sentence from the other gospels, this time about Jesus' clothes being divided amongst themselves with the guards, and he adds an entire paragraph. And there are stark additions to John's version of the story. For instance, in verse 23, in the Greek, it says Jesus' garment or tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from the top to the bottom. The Greek word for top to bottom is anothen. It means woven from above. This is from the story of Nicodemus. Those not born from above must be born again. It is also mentioned in the story with Pilate and said that no authority was given except from above. John uses this word as a double meaning. Now, Baptist theologian, world-renowned Johannine scholar Alan Culpepper says this is meant to be seen as a theme of unity. He says this could be seen in the relation to other stories, like John 10, when Jesus says that there are other sheep and all people will be drawn to himself. Then again in John 11, You have the dispersed children of God. John 17 ends with Jesus' prayer for those who come later, and that they will be one. Chapter 21 has the untorn net with the multitude of the fish catch story. In each case, you see an eschatological connection also shared with the seamless tunic. Jesus' ministry, death, and resurrection unite all people across time. Not even the tunic could be torn. Story number 3. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, the disciple took her into his home. This moment is only found in the Gospel of John. Is this meant to be symbolic? I think so. It's completely fine to imagine Mary is like Israel. The beloved disciple is like the church, and they're brought together at the cross. Jews and Gentiles brought together at the cross. This scene is yet another moment of unity. There's a new kinship, a new family being structured. It's no longer biological. It's the family of God. Mother Mary is now the mother of us all. And we are all, and this is the language we see in Scripture, his own. We are his children of God. We are brothers, my Father and your Father. As Jesus is dying at the cross, where he will be drawing all people to himself, a new unity in kinship and new family and new relationship is established with Mary and the beloved disciple. It really is an amazing scene. And so here you go. 3 moments in John 19 on Good Friday. The inscription, bringing in inclusive language by using all the major languages in the world, showing Jesus is king over all. That detail matters. The seamless tunic shows us how we are all united from a weaving from above to us. This also matters. Jesus establishes a new family, a kinship, symbolizing the beginning of God's new kingdom on earth. All of this happens with Jesus on the cross. If you ask me, this is why we call it Good Friday.